The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 12:11. Haven't I seen that guy? Even though no Hanali was present to hand him the award, and the ceremony he attended was one organized just moments prior, due to Lex's urgent need to leave, nothing about the event felt like it was perfunctory. He was brought to a massive stadium where rows upon rows of people filled the stands, even the ones floating up in the air and all around him, all of whom had been watching the show. There was a brief introductory speech, letting everyone know that while everyone else was still in the second or even the first trial of the streams they chose, there was a contestant who had already won. If this were the kind of tournament that would allocate positions, then he would be coming second. Lex was not too surprised to find out he'd be second, since Giselle had already finished before him. Regardless, everyone was super excited to see that someone had already finished, and even those who did not know about Lex began to search up his videos. There were no recordings from the time bubble, but the graveyard and maze had recordings of watching which drove everyone insane. Of course, the maze was only limited up until the tower itself, as they could not record what happened inside. What made everyone disappointed was that while the graveyard was action-packed, and the maze had some intense moments as well, there just wasn't enough to sate hunger for more action. Amidst cheering crowds from countless races across the realm, Lex walked out onto the stage and accepted the award, smiling and waving at everyone who saw him. At the same time, he was extremely grateful that he had been through the rejuvenation process before this. With his mind cleared of all urgency, and his emotions in check, he could play out this scene exactly how he imagined it. Whether the people he was putting on a show for were watching or not was irrelevant. He just needed to complete the act. What if it's not the Hanali attacking us? Damien, I recall you submitted a report that you suspected your grandson might be responsible. He has already interfered thrice before, once on Earth, once on Pulbitvi and once with the vessel. Isn't he a part of some powerful organization backed by a Tao Lord? I suspected it was him, Damien said, showing no change in expression, but upon investigation it was concluded that it was unlikely. According to our profile on the Tao Lord backing the Midnight Inn, he has a history of non-interference. At times it might seem like he is targeting someone, but that is circumstantial at best. For example, during the previous Midnight Games it seemed like he was targeting devils by forming the games around hunting zombies, but since then the inn has shown close partnership with devils. In fact, they are the largest demographic inside the inn, surpassing even humans, who are the second largest. The current Midnight Games seem to have targeted planets where we have taken action, yes, but it also includes countless other planets that are being invaded by non-sentient races. It seems the theme of the games this time is rising heroes, which necessitates making use of such planets. More importantly, we've been following my grandson since his name was put on the hit list. He has been documented taking part in the Hanali preliminary tournament. There's no way he could have orchestrated the attacks that we've been suffering from. As if to prove his point, he pulled up a video of Lex, standing in front of a large crowd, accepting his awards. He was smiling and laughing at the crowd as he accepted what was no doubt an extremely valuable award, though the actual awards remained hidden within spatial rings so no one knew what he got. Based on our analysis, he's not been in contact with the Hanali or any such forces, so even if he wanted to, it's highly unlikely he could orchestrate something like this. If anyone from my family had to be blamed, I'd think it would be my son and his wife. I've always sensed a hint of danger from them, even when my son gave up all his cultivation. The mood in the room became dim. Damien's son was another person they had their eyes on as a recruit, but his personality was too free-willed. They could not determine if he would join them or not. It was a shame, he would have been a good recruit. Hey, haven't I seen that guy on Lover's Island? Someone in the room suddenly said, pointing at Lex. Yeah, that's the guy with the harem. I even voted to have him killed. Damien, your grandkid is certainly very talented at pissing people off. Not only did he build a harem, he even publicly gave out his address and invited all angels to come to him. My God, if we can get someone like that in our marketing and propaganda department, our numbers will shoot through the roof. This time, it was the ape that groaned. They were being invaded. The number clearly stated it, so why couldn't anyone else see that? It was like their house was on fire, and these guys were content to use the flames to make themselves tea. Chapter 12:12 What can you do for me? On a particular planet, Horus was, alone, cutting through entire armies of insects though he wasn't killing at random. Across the globe, he found small pockets of resistance, cut off from everyone else, doing whatever they could to survive. He would, time and time again, venture out alone into the madness of war, with no support and nothing to fall back to, and save them. Not only would this improve the chances of him passing the Ventura test, it had earned him all kinds of nicknames from viewers such as Lone Hero, Knight in Shining Armor, and Poodle. More important than that, it earned him countless gifts and prizes. The rate at which he was growing stronger was ridiculous. It was not even that his cultivation realm was growing stronger. No, within the same cultivation realm, his strength, which he thought had peaked, was increasing exponentially. Finally, Horus managed to make his way through the horde of insects and reached a small village within a valley where survivors were fighting to protect themselves. After some planning and convincing that he could take them all out, Horus initiated the same plan he had used countless times. He placed countless lures within the village which would attract the insects, clearing the path for all the residents to escape. Once they were far enough away, the countless explosives he had rigged in the town would be set off, blowing them up. This plan, which had worked countless times before, went off without a hitch. The entire group of survivors were climbing up a mountain trail when the explosion went off. Not just them, but all the viewers watching across the realm and in the inn paused to watch the explosion, before carrying on. Yet what no one noticed was that after the explosion, the sight of the village was no longer an option to be viewed through the midnight game stream. That is why no one noticed when two men in suits appeared amongst the wreckage and made their way into a small opening that led deep underground to a hidden facility. The explosion had not affected the underground facility, it was designed to survive that. But what they had not anticipated was that after the explosion, all communication with the outside was cut off. This was troubling, for it might lead their off-planet coordinators to believe the explosion had led to a cave-in, and they might be abandoned. Ordinarily, someone would come and check on them, but with a war going on above them, if they didn't make contact first, they would be abandoned. This was tricky because they were holding sensitive information. For reasons no one could anticipate, the alarm didn't go off when the two suited men entered the base. The security systems turned off on their own, so the two men casually walked in and one by one, neutralized all the staff in that facility. Eventually someone noticed and a big fight ensued, but equipped with suits from the Midnight Tailor, the two men did not even need to defend themselves. It was a massacre. I don't understand, said the operating manager of the base as he leaned against the wall, bleeding. How did you find us? Our defenses are perfect. Even Tao Lords can't divine our location. Ordinarily, neither of the two would deign to reply. Yet one of the two was a member of the Nixhart family, which was led by Velma, so this was a matter that hit close to home. Discover new stories at novelhall.com. Your name's Vic, right? The Nixhart family member said, squatting down to be at eye level with the man. Who said anything about divination or Tao Lords? We got everything we needed to find you from Shelby. This market, or rather bazaar, was not even under the control of the Fugan, or Sanguis Pluvia. Though they were the greatest enemies of the Henali within the Origin realm, they were not the only ones who would benefit from keeping secrets from the Henali. Within this market, two suited men walked behind a teenager, or at least someone who looked like a teenager. Cultivation made it very difficult to determine someone's age just based on appearances. Many who saw the sight were surprised, for the two bodyguards had actually made quite a name for themselves within the Kala Bazaar, each for their own reasons. The older, more mature bodyguard had a way with words that let him sit face to face with the highest level members of the bazaar despite his low cultivation realm, while the younger was sinister enough to scare even the bazaar regulars. This is the place, the young man said, and let the older of the group enter first. The shop they had entered was empty, though the moment they entered the cold, gray interior suddenly changed, turning into a cozy, wooden cabin. Mr. Gerard, it's a pleasure to see you, said the projection of a middle-aged man who appeared in front of him. although I am surprised to see you here. Nothing in our analytics indicated that you would be interested in our services. Gerard smiled. Actually, I'm just here to pave the way for someone else today. Behind him, Roland, the former newspaper boy, and Luther entered. Interesting. Mr. Luther, I recognize, but I have no information in my database about you. Would you care to make an introduction? My name is Roland, he said, taking off his hat. I would be more than pleased to introduce myself properly, assuming I'm talking to the right person. As I understand it, there's a new AI leading your empire within the Origin realm. One that goes by the name Calculin. I am here to talk to him. Suddenly the projection of the middle-aged man talking to them froze, and after a few seconds returned to normal, only his expression had become completely neutral. He looked towards Roland, his body unnaturally still, as if all body language had been eliminated. How do you know about me? The projection asked, his voice unchanged, yet somehow devoid of all emotion. I have not yet made a formal introduction of myself in this realm. Roland smiled. It's my business to know things, he said, as he sat down and made himself comfortable. And the reason I'm here is not because I need something from you. Rather, I have information that you need from me. So the question is, Calculin, what can you do for me? Chapter 12-13 Rewards. As soon as the award ceremony was over, Lex returned to the inn. There were about 30 days in the Origin realm left till the actual tourney, and that meant about 90 days in the Midnight realm. That gave him about just enough time to finish up Moon's planet issue and bring her back. He also knew that despite its great success, if he had been monitoring the Midnight Games closely they would have gone even better. He could not forget to give the inn enough attention, for it was the basis of everything he did. But he really was too short on time. Between breaking through to the next realm, managing a massive conspiracy against Dow-level forces, taking care of his sister, looking for his other siblings and putting up the perfect act in front of the whole universe, he was a little swamped. But bit by bit, he was handling things. The first thing he did upon returning to the inn was investigate his rewards. There was the crystal orb containing countless laws that he got from the tower, as well as an invitation to the tourney. He swept through the next few items, not really expecting to be surprised, but he was proven wrong. Since the Henali had organized a tournament, and used the contestants to clear various incredibly troublesome areas for themselves, then how could they cheap out? The first, and more important item was a pill bottle containing a single pill called false death. There was also a small piece of jade which included a description of the pill. Upon consumption, it would not act immediately, but instead would assimilate with the body of whoever ate it. The pill would only come into effect if and when the person who consumed it would die. Not only did his cultivation technique innately increase his comprehension, so that this wouldn't be an issue, but he also had access to meditation rooms inside the Midnight in which achieved the same effect. In fact, he was sure that sooner or later he'd be able to improve the rooms even more. To be clear, each of his rooms had already gone through various rounds of upgrades already, and their effect was greatly enhanced, but to upgrade them further would cost multiple MT. Even though he had enough authority to increase the effectiveness of each room once more, he literally could not afford it. So much for being rich. Regardless, the second item wasn't bad. He could gift it to someone or use it according to circumstances, but at least right now he didn't need it. Maybe he'd put it in the gift shop. He'd been neglecting that for a while. He looked towards the final item, expecting another great but not at all useful item. To an extent, he was right, though it was undecided how useful it would actually be. The last item was an identity token linked to him. The token could be used not just in the Origin realm, but anywhere in the universe to identify as an ally of the Henali. It also contained 1,000 Henali credits, which could be redeemed to request a service of any kind from the Henali. As it was, Lex already had enough power and prestige to be able to request cooperation from the Henali without the use of these credits, but he could see how they were useful. The basis of him being able to request cooperation was the Midnight Inn and what it represented. Without it, he would need to use these credits. Lex put away all three items, and switched all of his belongings from his spatial bangle to his newly acquired spatial ring. Then, at last, he took out the crystal ball containing countless laws, ready to unleash it within the Midnight Realm. If even the Origin Realm wanted to absorb these laws, he could only imagine how useful they would be for the Inn. Without any prompt from Lex, the crystal ball shattered as soon as it was brought out of the ring, and all the colors within it dissolved. Lex almost called that anticlimactic, but managed to contain himself, not that he believed in setting off flags. Even so, a storm began to brew within the Midnight Realm. Chapter 12-14 Job well done. Through the system, Lex could exert control over the region that constituted the Midnight Inn, so with a single swipe of his hand, he moved the storm out. But while the inn was safe from the developing storm, the rest of the realm was not. Dark clouds suddenly formed above not only the 3 continents, but the cosmic sea as well. Thunder rumbled in the clouds, but it sounded completely different than usual. It sounded like crashing water and squeaking wood, while at the same time sounding like wailing winds and distant laughter. The unusual nature of the sounds made them seem ominous, though through his connection to the realm Lex could sense that there was no danger brewing. In fact, despite how dark the clouds were, from within them he could feel a great, vibrant energy building up. The entire realm was suddenly blinded by an exceptionally bright flash of light, after which the clouds burst, unleashing a heavy torrent of multicolored rain. Lex suddenly realized that preventing the clouds from forming over the inn might have been a mistake, and quickly allowed them to come back. All the guests looked up as a miraculous rain fell on them, and each of them, suddenly became stronger. The ground grew more solid, the trees grew taller, the beasts grew stronger, and everyone's cultivation rose. Lex suddenly felt the boundary of the entire realm loosen, and the highest sustainable rank suddenly became the Earth Immortal Realm. Every single being which had been trapped at the peak of the nascent realm across the entire Midnight Realm felt something new. They felt the sky above them grow larger, as if it could accommodate more, and each of them felt like they could initiate a change to a higher realm. Yet at the same time, they felt a warning from their instincts, as if to let them know that such a change would not be so easily attained. Lex could feel as the boundary of the Midnight Realm grew wider, and felt the continents grow slightly larger. He felt new biomes begin to form, and the spirit energy begin to boil as it grew more complex. "This is going to be a little gross, but just ignore it, okay?" said Lex as he placed his finger on Moon's forehead and began using one of the many healing techniques he had devised the past few years. All of the techniques just basically relied on the healing properties of his blood, and the one he was using now was the most efficient and effective one, which is also why it would be obvious that Lex's own blood would be used. Blood drops started to emerge out of Lex's skin and then snaked across his skin and into Moon's forehead. Moon's healing capability was beyond anything Lex had seen, and even he could only rival her due to various techniques that were unique in the whole universe. Now that her body, and her soul, were being nourished by his blood, it was like whatever her physique did gain steroids. "Wow," she suddenly exclaimed as energy suddenly flooded into her body, and then threw her into her connection with the planet. Yes, Lex was not just healing her, he was also healing her connection to the planet. Technically it didn't work like that, but it was a fact that his blood could play some role in expediting her assimilation of the planet, so he was going to do just that. One of the reasons Lex had avoided this from the beginning was because he didn't know how much of his blood it would take to actually do this. He didn't know if blood loss would affect him negatively, and the midst of a fight for his family, against his family, was not the best time for it. But now Lex wasn't afraid. If he weakened up a bit, he could hop back in the inn and let the rainwater nourish him back to his peak. Brute force was not the smartest way to do things, but sometimes it was the best option. He was patting himself on the back for a well-thought-out plan when his physique activated on its own. Empyrean resonance, which could enhance every single humanoid being that it affected, began resonating with Moon, who was absorbing Lex's blood. Chapter 12-15 Golden Core. Lex had already considered the possibility. He had specifically trained in how to control his physique, though there wasn't exactly an instruction manual for how to control a near-mythic physique that no one had ever heard of in history. But he had a very good understanding of his body, which is why he was fairly certain that he could prevent it from being randomly triggered. What he had not anticipated was that using over a certain amount of his own blood to heal someone would not trigger a random outburst from his physique, but a targeted one. But it was too late to stop now, so Lex kept using his blood to heal Moon. What he did do, though, was to summon the butter knife and use the divine energy to obscure any traces that the activation of his physique might leave behind. At the same time, Z, who felt that something unusual was happening, acted promptly and created a spatial barrier around themselves so that none of Lex's aura or energy would leak out onto the planet and its people. For the moment, the situation was under control. Lex used the entirety of his various senses to monitor any changes that Moon might be undergoing, but for all intents and purposes, she was completely normal. In fact, she seemed to be recovering her health and energy faster than normal. But after only a few minutes, it was Lex who suddenly felt a certain level of fatigue and stopped. Even if he wanted to strengthen Moon and speed up her return process, he couldn't afford to be weak. After all, if nothing else, then he would soon be undergoing his tribulations. Yet he didn't return to the inn immediately. He waited to see how Moon responded, yet as soon as he stopped, Moon fell into a kind of trance and laid back down in her hammock. She seemed like she had fallen asleep, but he could sense the vast amounts of energy coursing through her body, restructuring things. The problem with Moon was that the planet itself was an extension of her body, in a way, which is why even if he bled himself dry, it would not be enough to heal her completely. But the situation was actually much better than expected. While the forced healing had not brought her to a position where she could teleport with the planet, the interference by Lex's physique had resulted in an unexpected gain. In the process of assimilating the planet, she had gained an overwhelming advantage. Her own physique had evolved to somehow accommodate the planet into herself. In fact, she felt that it would only be a matter of days before the process self-initiated. If she succeeded, then she suspected that the planet of Yildirim Utopia itself would become her golden core. That statement was an absolutely ridiculous boast, and yet somehow, Lex found it to be completely believable. By now, he was getting used to his newfound perspective, which is that impossible usually only meant highly unlikely. The only thing that, in his experience, maintained its indomitable status was time itself. Everything else in existence seemed like the way it usually operated was just a very strong suggestion rather than an irrefutable truth. Maybe the origin of the statement "laws were made to be broken" was deeper and more profound than he had ever realized. Since it would be only a few more days, and Lex was free for that duration, Z was finally able to leave to do his other tasks, much to Moon's chagrin. She promised him to celebrate his 18th birthday in a few weeks inside the inn when she finally got there. In the meantime, the residents of the Utopia started to be sent to the inn as well. If she was about to absorb the planet, chances were high that everyone on it would die. This seemingly simple task turned out to be a lot harder than anyone expected, for there were quite a number of people who would rather accept death than be forced off their planet. Life Sketch. Chapter 12, 16 Secrets and Perspectives. Are you sure? Lex asked with a worried expression. Taking responsibility for the lives of others isn't a simple thing. It isn't a simple burden. The day had finally come. Moon was on the verge of absorbing the planet into her body, completing the assimilation process in a way no one expected. Yet close to 30% of the population of the planet had refused to leave. None of them knew what would happen to those people once Moon absorbed the planet. Chances were high that they would die. Whether she meant to or not, that would mean Moon had inadvertently killed 30% of the population of a planet. It felt a little selfish of him, but he was more concerned about her mental state after doing such a thing than the lives of the people on the planet. But Moon only chuckled at his concern. "Don't I already know it?" she asked. "After all, I have taken responsibility for them from the day I arrived here. It is not so casually that they call me their saintess." Lex clenched his fists as in this moment, he was genuinely powerless. He could have forcefully evicted those who did not want to leave, but Moon did not allow it. As much as he hated to admit it, he did not know nor did he understand the depth of the relationship between Moon and the people of this planet. When she had no one else, she had them. When she had no strength to save herself, she looked out for them. When all her freedoms were taken from her, she gave to the people of this planet the ultimate freedom to live as they wished without harming others. For a moment she wondered if Z was right. Did her brother like shining in the spotlight, which is why he waited until the right moment to act? It made sense. Considering he was neglected by their parents, it would make sense for him to crave more attention. In that case, if Moon succeeded, she would ensure to create plenty of such situations for her brother to shine. If she failed, then maybe her brother would do something else illogical and turn the situation around. Now she was suddenly confused about what to do. Fortunately for Lex, Moon wasn't exactly in control of the situation herself. Her body was accumulating energy, and when it accumulated enough it resonated with the planet. Everything, from the planet's core, to its crust, from the smallest atoms that made up its beings to the most complex laws that allowed it to exist as a celestial body, resonated with something deep within Moon's body, and a change began to occur. Lex, who was watching the situation, was stunned, and then fell into a trance. He felt like he saw something his consciousness was not ready to see, and so everything he saw began to automatically seal itself in his memories, lest it affect his path. It was a self-defense mechanism. Yet what he saw was simple. He saw that the life that inhabited the planet was actually a part of the life of the planet itself. It was so simple, yet it affected the way he comprehended the whole universe, which is why the memories needed to be sealed. The way mortal humans had bacteria living in their gut as a key component of what allowed them to live normally and healthily, planets needed other living things on it to live itself. It was such a simple concept, but it could be allowed on so many scales. While these thoughts were being sealed away in Lex's mind, Moon's human body began to fade, just as the planet began to dissolve. Somewhere in the middle, a new body was beginning to form. Elsewhere, far away in the origin realm, Zuriadissa, the sentient plant that had spread her spores across the entire realm, inhabiting trillions of planets, suddenly raised an eyebrow. She felt something interesting happening to one of her clones. Chapter 1217 Sad Planet Eater. Zuri genuinely had no idea how many clones she had. She had released them across the origin realm, and over the years they had spread far and wide. Each one grew on its own, and unless it became sufficiently powerful enough, or unless something particularly interesting happened, she would never even try to pay attention to them, even if they died by the masses. It just wasn't worth it. A few people approached her over the years to use her clones as a hidden information network, but that's not how it worked. Honestly, even if she could do that, such a way of life did not coincide with her path in life. But while she was not interested in collecting information for others to use, she was not averse to collecting information in general, especially regarding things she found interesting. Losing control over one of her clones, not because it was dying, but because it was being taken over by another entity, was certainly one of them. Of course, she also immediately felt that if she were to channel a hint of her power into it, her clone would be preserved. The process she was undergoing was not a hostile takeover, but just a passive effect of a greater phenomenon, so she did exactly that. She wanted to see what exactly was happening. As soon as she took over one of the 30,000 clones she had on Yildirim Utopia, she was welcomed to the unexpected sight of the world itself dissolving, its residents included. Yet she felt an unknown power preserve her even as the clone dissolved as well, only to reappear somewhere else. There was no sun or moon in the sky, and the stars were absent as well, yet it was bright as day. The star rating of the planet was not too high, but it was being filled with a unique energy she had never felt before. More importantly, every other living being on this planet that didn't have a certain level of minimum independence was being assimilated by the planet itself. Zuri could not understand where she was, for the laws of the world had changed, and she could not probe her location, at least through her clone, as weak as it was. But as she explored the planet, she found traces of an aura she recognized. It belonged to a human she had met once. Interesting, she murmured, but did nothing else. She wanted to see how this played out. Most up-to-date novels are published on n0delg.co/m. How cool would it be if, every time the Innkeeper sent someone a message, a world eater showed up as the messenger? Or if the battalion rode out to war, but instead of riding on a ship, they traveled on a world eater? These were thoughts for later, though. Lex immediately brought Moon's body to Nurse Jubilation as Dr. Charles to see why she wasn't waking up, even though he himself could also venture a guess. Her body was absorbing a large amount of spiritual energy even now, and ever so slowly, her cultivation within the golden core began to rise. Since the planet was her golden core now, he suspected she would need to reach golden core perfection, or even enter the nascent realm before she could wake up. Within the Midnight Realm, there were countless ways of expediting that. Soon, Moon was transported to a recovery pod which safely provided her body with pure and easily absorbable spiritual energy to feed her growth. Lex had no idea when exactly she would wake up, but at least now he knew she would be safe. A huge burden was lifted from his shoulders, and he breathed a sigh of relief. "I don't know if now is a good time," said Mary, who appeared over his shoulder. "But you have a meeting." "No problem," said Lex as he let all distractions slip away. "Do we have any new leads on Damien's location?" "Not yet," Mary said. "But word has already begun to spread that you will be appearing in the Trial of Eternity soon." "Good. Begin the next phase of the plan." Chapter 12:18 Drama. "I must say, this is a rather bold-fashioned statement," said Jeeves as he fixed Lex's tie, and took a step back to look at his latest piece of work, though its design had been according to Lex's demands. The suit was a thing of darkness, woven from fabric that seemed to drink in the light around it, leaving an unsettling void in its wake. The blackness of the suit was not merely a color, but an abyss, a yawning chasm that hinted at unspeakable things lurking just beyond the edges of perception. The shirt beneath was as black as the deepest night, and the tie, a narrow strip of the same, lay against the chest like a serpent coiled in malevolent anticipation. There was a strange, almost eldritch quality to the suit, as though it had been stitched together not by mortal hands, but by forces best left unnamed, its very presence a silent whisper of vengeance and madness. It was black on black on black, which would have seemed a bit excessive if not for how deeply it flattered Lex's physique. Anyone who looked at him would not be able to look away, either for his handsomeness, which had grown immensely with his cultivation. Having a well-toned body also helped. Yet much more attractive was the sense of danger oozing off his body. Danger tingled the perception of anyone who laid eyes on him, filling their mind with an excitement of living life on the very edge. Ordinarily, Lex would not really have cared much for public attention. It was nice when he got some, but most of the time he was able to do whatever he wanted in life without caring about how others would perceive him. Yet right now he wanted to put on an act, which was not so much an act, and he needed everyone who laid eyes on him to feel his vengeful mood. "Would you like the sheath on your hips or on your back?" Jeeves asked, completely unaffected by the ethereal pull of the black suit. "Waist is fine," Lex said, and stood still while the tailor made a small amendment to his suit to allow him to attach Naraka's sheath to it. Once it was done, Lex looked in the mirror once to admire his visage. This gathering was not exactly as prestigious as the Henali Assembly, which was held once a century for the Tao Lords of the realm, but it was a close second, for it invited all the peak powers of the realm. Even representatives of the Tao Lords were present as well, which is why the gathering was filled by peak celestial level and demi-Tao Lord level beings. While they mingled and discussed the future of the realm, a few of them were paying attention to a screen where the champions' tourney was being shown. The masses were deprived of this show, but not them. After all, they were the ones who had sent most of the candidates to be crowned champion. "Who's that?" asked an especially effeminate voice, as a flower petal moved, pointing towards a handsome man in black. "Ah, that young man is one I have been keeping an eye on," answered Zuri, a mysterious gleam passing through her eyes. "Zuri, have some shame. That human is at least a few hundred millennia younger than you. Just because you like to spread your clones does not mean you need to find children to help with the job." "Fine, crack jokes," Zuri said, not at all minding the humor. "I guess that means you don't want to know the drama that's been unfolding all around him." These beings, at the peak of the realm, barely got any free time. Most of them had never even heard of Lex, let alone focus on his problems. They had their own fair share of problems to focus on. "Oh? Drama? And enough of it to attract your attention? Now I have to hear this." Chapter 12-19 Archangel. The story is quite simple, Zuri said as she watched the scene unfold in front of her. Lex was one of the favorites of the preliminary games, and was even the first person to have a prize ceremony in that tournament, though he was the second one to finish the tournament itself. Regardless, as the story goes, not only was he a favorite, with one of the most astounding performances, rumors spread that he didn't even need to attend the preliminary tournament to begin with, as he has a very strong backer. But, as the story goes, apparently his backer has told him to rely on himself for all personal matters. No one knows why, but many suspect that he is being groomed as an heir. Being competent and self-sufficient, after all, is one of the greater traits of the heirs of such powerful people. Yet for all the ability he has displayed, he is constantly plagued by hardships. It's come to everyone's attention that apparently, he has a sister who suffered some kind of incurable injury or disease. She has fallen asleep and isn't waking up. Before that, she suffered from various assassination attempts, get this, from their own grandfather. For the past few weeks he has been trying to get in contact with the Henali one way or another for a way to heal his sister. But, they obviously do not want to make it too easy for him, since they obviously want him to depend on them. Rumor has it that he was told to accumulate 100,000 Henali credits to heal his sister. While all of this happens, he's began looking for his grandfather as soon as the preliminary tournament ends, but he hasn't been able to get a single lead. The aura he's giving off right now is probably a result of being pressured by the monumental task of accumulating so many credits to save his sister in time, and driven to rage by his inability to find his grandfather. If he wants to fulfill even one of those tasks anytime soon, he has no choice but to participate in the champions tourney and perform well. It's no wonder he's reacting so strongly, especially when his own backer isn't actually helping him out. The flower couldn't help but raise its voice, attracting everyone's attention. Yet Zuri only smiled and looked at her screen. She had only mentioned knowledge that was easily attainable in public. She had not made mention of the fact that she was also aware of Lex's other sister, who was far from ordinary. As someone who herself was not a Tao Lord, she was in no position to give someone such a title, but Lex's other sister most definitely also counted as a Tao Lord candidate. That meant there weren't two candidates from one family but three. Considering the fact that there was nothing publicly known about his other sister, there was always a chance that the number might even be 4. Zuri was not one to conspire against others. It wasn't in her nature. But that did not mean she had to abstain from watching such a good show. Plus, having kept an eye on Moon for so long, she was fairly certain that her situation was not nearly as bad as it was made out to be in public. Lex was putting on a show, and she was interested in watching it. Oh, did I mention that the dragons have made an entry into the champions tourney this year? Zuri continued. And it just so happens that the chances are very high that the dragon contestant will run into Lex. Wait, right, you don't know about that either. So apparently, Lex has some drama with the dragons as well. Zuri began to regale those who would listen about the various stories surrounding Lex. Anyone and everyone could see that the situation was turning into a boiling pot, and would erupt soon. Still, the situation was not critical enough for all the attending dignitaries to pay close attention to Lex. But for the sake of staying updated on this entertaining situation, they kept an eye on Zuri's screen. Chapter 12-20 Lines of Power. Lex met the gaze of the countless immortals in the room before going to find a corner to sit in. He restrained his aura, as he was not here to pick a fight, he was here mostly to get his process started and make an impression. By being able to effortlessly ignore the simultaneous gaze of hundreds of immortals without so much as batting an eye, he had proved himself. Others also did not pick a fight or bother him, not because they were good-tempered people, but because they were all there for the same purpose of being briefed. Had that not been the case, the strong ominous presence given off by his suit would have surely provoked someone. Some time passed and more participants came, until eventually a hush fell over the room and all was silent. A projection of a man appeared in front of everyone. No, not a man. Lex sat up straight as he identified one of the more mysterious races in the origin realm, the Ulan race. Read latest novels at novelhall.com. At a glance he looked like every other human, until you got a good look at him and noticed the lines of power within his body. Lines of deep blue, pulsing energy passed through his fair skin like a river cutting through land. Those lines, naturally formed in various artistic patterns, supposedly contained entire rivers of spiritual energy too vast and rich for any mundane race to tolerate. Lex paid close attention to them, sensing a subtle sense of danger each time he saw the lines pulse, and a few shimmerings appeared around them. The previous champion, Zarkon, was a serious underdog who appeared out of seemingly nowhere. He took the whole tourney by surprise, and became the contested champion. But his legend did not end there. By now he had reached the heavenly immortal realm, and though that was nowhere near the peak of the realm, Zarkon's legend was growing ever stronger. To date, he had never experienced a defeat since he became champion, and it was said that he never failed the Henali on any mission they sent him to. When he was sent to the Fugan battlefields, the battle would end. When he was sent to explore new corners of the realm, he would come back with riches and treasures. It was as if Zarkon could make any wish the Henali had come true. The high society of the Origin realm, his name was one that was commonly brought up. That is the name, the legend that you aspire to. Remember that, as you venture forth and face the challenges that are in store for you. The first challenge is in a place you will surely have heard of. It is called the Trial of Eternity. If an artificial hush had fallen onto the room before, the hush now was genuine. Everyone had naturally heard of the Trial of Eternity. Nobody knew how it came to be, or how long it had existed, the Henali included. It was a place filled with immense danger, and the only reason its name was commonplace was because it was said that rare treasures grew in that place that made it easier to pass through various immortal tribulations. Yet venturing in and coming out successfully was a tribulation unto itself that few succeeded, and that was but the first venue for the champion's tourney. Chapter 12:21 Development. Your objective in the Trial of Eternity is simple. For reasons, as of yet unknown, the Henali have detected signs that the barrier that keeps the Trial of Eternity inside a segregated zone of existence is beginning to unravel. These are very early signs, of even if it does end up happening, it will still be thousands of years in the future. But there is no need to wait until the problem has grown to treat it. You only have one mission in the Trial of Eternity, with another bonus objective that is not mandatory or even expected. Your mission is to identify the reasons behind the weakening of the barrier, and your bonus objective is to resolve the issue. The time frame for this mission is 3 years. If, within 3 years, you are unable to complete the mission, it will be treated as a failure, and you will be sent to a subsequent portion of the tourney based on your performance. Now then, I am going to brief you on the conditions inside the Trial of Eternity. I'm sure you already know some things, but it is best to give you a full detailed report. Inside there is one major landmass, with countless smaller masses floating around it. They exist in stasis, which means they just kind of float there without moving. There are no stars, or anything of the sort, so it is mostly imbued in darkness, although spontaneous explosions occur frequently, which then become sources of light. The energy distribution there is highly skewed towards lightning and fire, which is why the treasures which are born there are inclined towards those two elements. But as a result, there are countless lightning storms and random combustions in there. There was a genius who once had the bright idea of having his immortal tribulation there. The first lightning strike itself reduced him to dust. As comedic as it was, it set off a chain of lightning storms so brutal that almost everyone in the entire zone died. As a general rule, any kind of energy spike anywhere in the entire place will set off some kind of storm since the energy there is highly unstable, so do not try to do anything too flashy there. In fact, one of the reasons why all of you have been selected to enter the Trail of Eternity is because if we send in stronger cultivators, the storms they might cause will be even bigger, which might end us causing more harm than good. Now, the wind patterns. Noman, who had the uncanny ability to detect when someone was lying, also suffered from a huge curse. As soon as he detected a lie, he was forced to whisper that it was a lie. He himself was completely unaware of it happening, though he knew it was something he did, for it got him into a lot of trouble frequently. But then, Alexander sighed. At the same time, that's also why I suggested contacting Lex. We can try avoiding this problem, but the quicker we handle it the better, and as much as I hate to burden him again. Lex is very resourceful. He'll be able to find a way to help us. Alexander felt conflicted. He had grown so much stronger, and he was still asking Lex for help. It was not asking for help that caused him to feel conflicted, rather how embarrassing his current problem was. If he asked Lex for help, he would have to explain the situation, which was. There is no need to get Lex involved in this, said Raphael, who suddenly walked up to them. He knew most of them from his visions of the future, which is why he knew the potential they held, and also knew the fastest way to help them realize it, which was to face these problems themselves. He is already under great scrutiny, and if we reach out to him, he will make new enemies as well. There is no need to increase his burdens. He's from Earth, just like us, said Sudha. That will be enough for others to suspect him. No, you're wrong about that, said Raphael as he shook his head. He is not from Earth. He is from the Midnight Inn. No one will think otherwise unless we give them reason to. Chapter 12:22 Warning. Lex did not notice the group because of a few reasons. Firstly, he was not spreading his spirit sense around, nor was he looking around the room, so it was fairly easy to miss them. More importantly, they were hiding. Lex wasn't the only person in the room who hadn't reached the immortal realm, but he was most certainly the only one who so openly advertised it. In fact, the Ulan had said it himself. They actually wanted lower-leveled cultivators to avoid any potential problems. The Trial of Eternity was a zone that could harm immortals, regardless of the level. Even celestial immortals could face dangers there, though they faced other kinds of dangers than the lightning and fire, which is why if the zone suddenly entered the origin realm openly, the disaster it could bring was incalculable. It would literally take a Tao Lord to contain it, yet using powers on the Tao Lord level within the origin realm was forbidden as it could damage the realm. Lex knew all of this, and in fact, he knew a little more than the Ulan was telling. Through his various sources, such as Velma, and the Infinity Emporium, Lex had stumbled upon a speculation of how the place might have been formed. It was a speculation, without any information about who had the speculation, or how likely it was, yet Lex had a feeling it was right. The speculation stated that the Trial of Eternity was a zone that was created as a result of someone at the peak of the celestial realm undergoing a major tribulation. A major tribulation was one that happened between realms, such as between the nascent realm and the Earth Immortal realm, or the Earth Immortal and Heavenly Immortal realm. After the celestial realm should be the Tao Lord realm, right? Or did one have to first become a demi-Tao Lord? Lex wasn't too clear about the exact specifics, but the point was he found it entirely believable that such a place could have been created through such a way. Lex, while maintaining a perfectly stoic expression, was continuing to let his thoughts wander when someone approached him and reached out with their spirit sense, interrupting him. She nodded, not expounding on the matter prematurely. I suspected as much. In lieu of our cooperation, I'll give you a heads up. The situation inside is going to get really messy. In fact, unless you're well prepared to face extreme conditions, I would suggest that you skip out on this trial altogether. It's uncertain how things will turn out. Giselle paused, and looked at Lex deeply. She then looked at his suit, and then took a look around the room as if she understood something. Thanks for the heads up, she said seriously. But I will be participating anyway. This might end up working in my favor. After all, you've already seen that I myself am not without adversaries of my own. Lex slightly nodded, and then the two split apart, not speaking to each other anymore, though countless had already witnessed the exchange. A short while later, once the Ulan had sufficiently impressed upon everyone the dangers they were about to face, he proceeded to discuss how they would be entering. The Trial of Eternity is entirely cut off from the origin realm, even if it is technically inside the realm itself. As a result, one cannot teleport in, and there is no physical entrance either. The only official way to enter it is to use a ship specially designed for travel between realms, capable of traversing any obstacle, even in the absence of space itself. It is also the only official way to exit, so upon completion of the mission you will need to inform the respective people, who will organize an exit trip and let the Henali know of the situation. That also means contact between the origin realm and the trial of eternity is largely cut off, and it is very difficult to get any information across, so be careful. Afterwards, the Ulan directed the crowds through a corridor towards the impressive vehicle that could travel through the void. Jack, who was entirely in a different realm, suddenly started to pay attention to the world through Lex's eyes. He wanted to learn everything about void travel, so that one day he could allow the Jolly Rancher to do the same. Stepping into the ship, Lex felt like he had walked into another space entirely. The space inside the ship was strangely artificially solid, so much so that it felt slightly suffocating. Yet perhaps that was exactly the kind of thing needed for a vessel to traverse through the void safely. Naturally, with the Jolly Rancher, Jack would have to come up with a better solution. Lex found a corner for himself to sit in and closed his eyes. Though he was curious about the ship, he had to sell the act at the moment, and he was well aware that he was under supervision even if it didn't seem like it. It will take roughly 96 hours to get to the trials of eternity, and once there each and every one of you will be dropped off at a different point. This is for your own safety. Once every year the ship will make a round to see if there is any progress. If you manage to complete the mission, you will still have to wait till the return of the ship to be credited for it, don't forget. Lex entered a meditative trance, ensuring that he was in his peak state as they approached their destination. This was a long time coming, and even if he was absolutely certain in his preparation, that did not mean that there was no risk. In fact, most cultivators did not pass their first tribulation. Lex had not forgotten that the first time he encountered a tribulation, which was inside the Midnight Inn, the devil that had been experiencing the tribulation died. For example, an immortal may be able to bypass the requirement of temperature change to bring about the freezing or boiling effect in water by directly influencing the laws that dictated the behavior of water itself. That is where tenets came into play. The way an immortal perceived, and then influenced the laws of the universe was totally and completely dependent on their tenets. This meant that two immortals, even if they were twins who had lived an identical life in all their experiences, would see the universe differently from one another as long as there was even the slightest difference in their tenets, which was almost a certainty. When studying the same laws of water, someone who had tenets of music might perceive the actions and influences on water through patterns and melodies, whereas a swordsman would see it entirely differently. Even if they brought about the same end result, the way they would each do it was completely different, and something they would have to discover for themselves. This was another reason why growth among immortals was so slow. At most, a person could offer some guidance, but they could not actually teach anything about laws to anyone. That usually depended entirely upon personal comprehension and understanding. With that said, it was obvious how extremely important tenets were to someone, which is why picking the right ones was an extremely important decision, almost as important as deciding the number of tenets as well. The reason why it was called tenets, and not tenet, is because almost all immortals had multiple tenets. After all, it was rare to find a person with only a singular interest, and even rarer for them to rise through the cultivation ranks. Life would, inevitably, find ways to add various obstacles or challenges in someone's path, which would end up shaping their personality in various ways. As such, finding a single thing a person could dedicate their entire life to was exceptionally difficult. Moreover, there was no clear benefit to having more or fewer tenets. Considering that a tenet could be literally anything, from a way of life, to an abstract concept, to something entirely imaginary that did not actually exist in reality, it was almost expected for an immortal to have at least 4 or 5 tenets. After all, usually, what most people did when selecting a tenet was picking something they had a natural affinity for, or something they were dedicating their life to. Chapter 12:24 Tenets 2. While seeking guidance in this regard, and considering his own tenets, since he hadn't really specialized in any one thing, but excelled in many, he had consulted Kawan and Anita. It was not at all a surprise to find that Kawan only had one tenet, which was the way of the sword. That literal, entire phrase was his tenet, something he shared openly, though Lex understood that usually it was not the kind of information one divulged easily. Considering that Kawan only had 2 passions in life, swordsmanship and Anita, it was not surprising at all. What was surprising were Anita's tenets. She had the tenets of nurturing, guidance, protection, leadership, perseverance and kindness. If Lex hadn't known any better, then he would have thought she was messing with him. But Anita gave him the background of why she had chosen those as her tenets. On the planet she was from, which Lex to this day did not actually know nor had he visited, she was the one who led humans from their early days as cavemen. She brought that whole race out and helped them stand on their feet, and when she could see that they would be hopeless without her, found a way to change her race from human to lich so that she could lead humans for even longer. But all good things must end, and there eventually came a time when she left the humans to fend for themselves. She had a new life now, and she was more than happy with it currently. In fact, she loved being a mother so much that it only reaffirmed her choices of the tenets she selected. Perhaps motherhood and maternal instincts would have better served her as tenets, but there was no point in bringing it up now. Tenets could not be changed. Even John, who had lost his cultivation entirely, would regain the same tenets he lost if he were to ever return to the Earth immortal level. Visit no, v. 3lb/n. com for new novels. All it would take was one strong enemy who took him by surprise, and everything would be over. The kind of tenet he would pick would naturally influence him as well. They would shape how he thought, how he acted, literally how he perceived the universe. It was a single decision, and its repercussions would follow him for the rest of his life. Yet now, more than ever, Lex was leaning more and more towards the pursuit of power. Somewhere, in the back of his mind, he knew that he had already made a decision. He was just allowing himself these few, final moments of thought and contemplation before he adorned that weight onto himself. The 96 hours that the journey was supposed to take flew by faster than ever before, and when Lex opened his eyes, the ship was already within the trial of eternity. The moment was upon him, and he knew he could back out no more. This would be a defining moment for Lex, not because he was becoming an immortal. No, instead it was because everything he had been through before this, whether it was getting the inn, bagging his first guest, getting an amazing reward, finding an overpowered cultivation system, growing ridiculously strong, receiving guiding advice, all of it, each to a certain degree, was through external influences. That was not to say that Lex had not made his own decisions, he had. But in most things, he was just reacting to a problem, trying to resolve it. This would be the first time he was making his own decision, acting to preemptively negate many problems, and take control over the direction of his life. He stood up, and his aura naturally became even more honed and deadly than it was before. Silently, his second seal unraveled, and he touched his third seal from over his clothes. The time was nigh. One by one, the various passengers on the ship were sent out until it was eventually Lex's turn. When he appeared in his new location, he was surrounded by complete darkness, his suit blending in perfectly. He could have been completely undetected if he chose to hide, but he did not. Targeting him. Chapter 1225 An attempt. Lex did not go anywhere, or do anything. In fact, he sat down exactly where he was, summoning a chair and a small light to ensure that everyone could see the spot far and wide. Lex did not believe in doing things himself if others could do it for him. He had a lot of enemies in this place. In fact, he had so many enemies here that he wasn't even certain who he would end up facing. There were the dragons, the sinuous pluvia, a number of bounty hunters, a group of guys who were pissed at Lex for his role in Lover's Island, and so on and so forth. Someone had given him a list, but after ensuring he knew who the most dangerous ones were, he couldn't be bothered with the rest. Considering the extremely volatile nature of this place, Lex did not expect most to take action against him easily. Only the very bold, or the very stupid would make such a move. "It's rude to stare," Lex suddenly said out loud, and looked in a certain direction. As if his gaze itself was enough to control the world, a low, yet warm light appeared where he was looking, revealing a tall, dark shadow. "You are quite astute," the shadow said as it began to come closer. "I have spent a considerable time in the shadow plane. Once you understand what to look for, it's very easy to pick out a shadow, even in the dark." "You are also quite arrogant," the shadow observed, before rippling. A dark figure stepped out of the shadow and revealed itself before Lex, though his identity was still hidden. Lex did not care about the insult, however, he just looked at the figure with disappointment. "You're not him," Lex said. Even though the opposite person's identity was hidden, Lex could tell it was not Damien. All he needed to do was check if their bloodlines were the same. "After all the effort he's taken to goad me into coming out, I thought he'd at least take the opportunity to meet me." Visit No. v. 3lb/n. com for new novels. There was no place easier to eliminate the many participants of the tournament than the Trial of Eternity, yet for some odd reason the explosion was a lot more tame than the Shadow had expected. He was just about to leave, beginning an investigation into why the explosion was much smaller than he expected, when through the flames he saw a silhouette and paused. Without so much as a change in his expression, Lex was revealed sitting exactly as he had been, looking bored. As if the figure was not dazed enough, he saw Lex raise his hand and clench them into a fist, which caused the flames around him to shrink further and further. Not only were they not setting off more explosions, they were becoming smaller. How could the figure have known that Lex used Heaven's furnace to prevent the flame from growing too big? "You actually thought of using flames to harm me?" Lex asked in an amused fashion. Considering he could tame even dragonfire using only his eye, ordinary flames were not even worthy of burning in his presence. "Listen, Junior, why don't you go back and let your seniors handle this one? I'm pretty sure this is above your pay grade." The dark figure was enraged even further, but he did not act once more. To begin with, his problem had just been to probe Lex's strength. The figure soon turned back into shadow and disappeared, allowing instead new figures to walk towards the diminishing flames behind Lex. They observed him sitting casually as he was from the get-go, completely unharmed by the previous explosion. In fact, he seemed a little offended at the lack of effort put into trying to kill him. He looked at the two with great expectation. Chapter 12:26 A Warm Welcome. Though through the use of Heaven's furnace, Lex had contained the spread of devastation, he could feel that a disturbance had been caused in this place. If all had been still before in the Trial of Eternity, then now heavy winds were buffeting the lands. A carefully established equilibrium had been broken, and the chances of spontaneous combustion had increased exponentially. But this was only the beginning. Lex looked at the two figures, and for a moment he had great expectations, but then they vanished. He was unimpressed. Much like the previous dark figure, whose identity was not nearly as hidden in Lex's eyes as he had thought, these two were also clearly sent by someone to probe. "You have some gall." One of the two figures began to speak, before his body blew up entirely. That one had not even been an immortal, and so was unworthy of too much attention. Lex used a technique he had not used in a long time, since it no longer suited his realm. Evisceration was a soul-based attack launched from the eye that was pretty good up until he was in the Golden Core realm, but naturally reached its ceiling in power after that. Lex, through the sheer strength of his own soul, could still use it to attack those in the nascent realm, since he no longer considered them real enemies to begin with. The second figure, who was an immortal, froze, and then stepped back and disappeared. "Mary, what have we learned about the Sanguis Pluvius plans?" Lex asked while he waited for more probes. "They have many objectives within the Champions tourney. In the Trial of Eternity, they aim to weaken future generations of Henali forces by eliminating all the participants. We have recently learned that, in another one, they have sent way more infiltrated members than any other, though we don't yet know the reason." "Old man? You mean Damien? He is but a young spring chicken. Regardless, even if I know where he is, what can you do about it? Even if you learn where he is, what can you do about it? He is a heaven immortal, much like your ancestor. He is not so weak. What can you even do to him?" Jeffrey, the spider, jumped again as it anticipated Lex's teleportation. Simultaneously, it also attacked Lex. A formation had appeared on the ground where Jeffrey previously stood, and where Lex now stood, trapping him. He could not teleport away, nor could he dodge the incoming attack, so it fell onto his chest. Lex felt it attempting to morph him in some way. But naturally it failed. Anytime anyone tried to influence his body in any way, they found it much harder than they expected, much like the prophanites who had been shocked that Lex was completely unaffected by their profane energy. There was a very simple reason for this. Even if one did not consider that Lex had absorbed a Tao-level ingredient, just the fact that he had bonded with Lotus changed the very status of his body. Previously, he was the same as a walking planet. Now, however, that the Lotus was in the process of merging with Minara, the smallest continent in the Midnight Realm, which was still greater than most planets, and eventually the realm itself, its nature was already changing. Naturally, that meant Lex's status was also changing. He was the same as a walking, talking, budding new realm, and right now he was about to undo the complete seal on his body. What can I do to him? Kill him, of course. Are heaven immortals supposed to be impressive? Lex crushed the tiny treasure in his chest, sealing his power, and in the microsecond before his tribulation appeared, teleported to Jeffrey and grabbed onto him much faster than the twisted spider could react to. Do you think you guys are all that impressive? Hiding in the shadows and acting like vermin, yet so proud of it. Let me show you what I can do about things. The entire trial of eternity experienced an electric jolt, and every single living being within it suddenly sensed extreme danger. At the same time, with his full power unleashed, Lex spread out his senses and located every single person who had come here to hunt him down. Might as well give them a warm welcome. Chapter 1227, just getting started. It felt liberating to finally release the seal on his body, and at the same time extremely strange. He was suddenly, so much more. The range of his spirit sense increased by 100 times, while simultaneously becoming much stronger. His thoughts began to flow faster. His body felt more firm. Even the reserve of spirit energy he had access to suddenly felt a lot greater. He had, in the nascent realm, reached such a state of immense power that it was literally impossible for him to exist in the realm any longer without seriously containing his power. Even with his cultivation technique, which was one of a kind, could not claim full responsibility for this. It was almost entirely a result of two things. First, it was his bond with Lotus. As Lotus became stronger, the feedback it gave Lex was greater as well. If ever Lex should become significantly stronger than the Lotus, the reverse would be true as well. The second reason was the absorption of the amber chaos resin. Or, more specifically, the unexpected, yet somehow logical synergy that was formed between the resin and his bond with Lotus, and its immense feedback. The amber chaos resin was a treasure that was formed during the birth of a new realm, or more specifically, it was the source material that made up the realm, somehow left unused during the birth process. As something which was essentially a building block for an entire realm, the benefits it could provide were well beyond Lex's imagination. Genuinely, he had not expected just how much of a boost it would give him. It resulted in a massive phenomenon that was seen across the entire Midnight Realm, and if he hadn't promptly sealed himself with the help of Lotus, he would have triggered his tribulation right then and there. But there were good reasons to keep his body sealed, and prevent his tribulation from occurring. Primarily, Lex did not think the Midnight Realm could tolerate his tribulation. From the very start he had always been different, and he had every reason to believe that his tribulation would be extraordinarily exaggerated, well beyond what a newborn realm can tolerate. Secondly, it was so that the benefits can manifest properly. Lotus, formerly known as World Seed Lotus, could give birth to a 5-star world with sentience. The resin, formerly known as amber chaos resin, was used to make a realm. While everyone in the trial of eternity felt immense danger, Lex felt like it was not enough. Since he was only taking an immortal tribulation to enter the earth immortal realm, even exacerbated by this strange place, his tribulation remained within a certain limit. It couldn't be helped. The strength of each tribulation was limited by the realm that was being broken through. So he took matters into his own hands. Jeffrey, who was still grasping what exactly was happening, was completely unprepared for the sudden increase in strength Lex demonstrated. Lex grabbed him by the hand, and as a result crushed the entire hand, causing it to fall off. Among the many things he'd imagined himself doing in life, accidentally cutting off the arm of an immortal was not one of them, and yet here he was. Lex grabbed him again, this time careful not to cripple him, and raised his body high up above him, as if to protect himself. As a result, Lex's tribulation, which was still forming, suddenly grew larger. "What the hell are you doing?" Jeffrey roared as he tried to resist Lex. He used laws and abilities and techniques, but they flowed off Lex's body as if he was throwing a bucket of water against a mountainside. It was barely worth notice. Instead, just through sheer physical force, Lex pinned the immortal down, and then chose his next target. Lex did not teleport over. No, instead he reverse teleported hundreds of enemies all around him. "What am I doing?" Lex repeated Jeffrey's words. "I'm just getting started." Chapter 12:28 Tribulation begins. Lex became extremely sensitive towards the intentions of others. More important than just intentions, he became exceptionally skilled at determining who was acting on those intentions only as long as he was the intended target. His instincts rose to a whole new level, so that if anyone within a radius of 100 miles of him did anything at all, with him as the intended target, whether it was good or bad, he would be able to sense it. Perhaps what Dao Lords possessed was a much more powerful version of this ability. He was still not certain how it worked, besides that his instincts were responsible for it. As a result, anyone and everyone within 100 miles of him who was observing him with the intentions to harm him, or take advantage of his weakness, were teleported over. Read latest Cha/P/Terzon. By the time this happened, an entire 1 second had passed since Lex had broken his seal. Coming to terms with the immense danger they felt, as well as the rising tingling sensation all over this special zone, combined with forcefully being teleported somewhere, all these people were a little overwhelmed. That was unfortunate, because things only became more chaotic from there. Arcs of lightning suddenly started appearing within the darkness of the Trial of Eternity, and each of them, from across the entire realm, were traveling towards Lex and the little tribulation support group he had formed. Everyone's hair stood on end, and not just because they sensed the danger. The static charge in the entire zone was being built up, so much so that it was affecting even immortals. A particularly massive bolt of lightning flashed in the air above Lex, revealing thick, pitch-black clouds which had begun gathering above him, and the hundreds of immortals around him suddenly felt their heart drop. They ran. They teleported. They flew. They tried everything and anything, yet they could not move from their exact spot. Some of them, however, coughed out blood and became pale. They couldn't understand what was happening. They were immortals. They had already passed their tribulations. Yet they could not even survive the sound of Lex's first tribulation strike? Storms began to brew across the entire zone, and entire energy currents flowed towards the black clouds fueling them. Considering that this was only Lex's first tribulation, he was supposed to be struck with 9 rounds of lightning. Then, each time he went up a level within the immortal realm, that number would go up by 9. That rule changed for heavenly immortals, but that was not pertinent to Lex at the moment. "Come, the party has just begun," Lex said as his body began to float up into the air. "Let's invite more friends to join." Lex grabbed Jeffrey by the head, and used his mind meld to peer into his mind. Yet there was a seal on his innermost thoughts. Only some outer, unprotected thoughts could be accessed by Lex, and even as strong as he was, he could not break through that seal at the moment. Yet it hardly mattered right now. All Lex wanted was to find more enemies, and Jeffrey knew the exact location for all the Sanguis Pluvia agents within this zone off the top of his head, which served to benefit Lex. He teleported away, bringing his honor guard with him. Yet that only seemed to enrage his tribulation. It felt like Lex was trying to escape, and so another bolt flashed through the entirety of the zone, chasing him down to strike him. Yet the massive bolt of lightning could not even break Lex's skin. Instead, it only made him smile. The countless immortals all around him suddenly trembled. What kind of maniac had they encountered? Who would be pleased upon being struck by lightning? Not even the worst of masochists, surely. But, apparently, Lex was exactly such a person. Chapter 12:29 Fool. The sound of thunder did not just shake the ground, it shattered it. Thick chunks of dirt broke off from the ground and flew out into space around the massive landmass, while endless crystals, treasures, and corpses were revealed underneath. As a result, the massive landmass was losing integrity, making it dangerous for everyone within this zone. Yet for all the dangers it was bringing, Lex's tribulation was ironically also making the zone safer for everyone. Any ordinary disturbance would have set off a chain of explosion or lightning strikes, but with his tribulation growing stronger, it began attracting all the energy within the realm, directing it towards the clouds and the sky. Jeffrey, whose body was completely immobilized under Lex's grip, looked at Lex for a second and then up at the clouds. Something flashed in his eyes, though he was careful not to reveal any signs of it. But he did not need to reveal any signs. 100 miles all around Lex, wherever he went, was completely his own domain. Everything that happened within, as long as it was related to him in any way, would directly be revealed to him. Not only did he notice Jeffrey's subtle movement, he even knew what he was planning. Unlike him, Lex did not suppress his smile. Each of them were plotting against the other as each second passed by. Only the victor would determine who had outmaneuvered the other. Lex kept teleporting, gathering more and more people who were targeting him, while ignoring everyone who was an innocent bystander. The 5th, the 6th, and the 7th bolt struck Lex, and finally upon the 7th Lex groaned, unable to resist. Although he had a high tolerance for pain, each lightning strike burned his insides, forcing them to reform. Eventually, even he was unable to resist. But the problem was, even as he neared the 9 bolts expected for his tribulation to enter into the immortal realm, not even half his body had experienced this unusual form of rebirth. The 8th bolt struck, and this time Lex nearly caught the bolt, but not quite. He groaned again, but still suffered no visible damage. The sight began to scare all those watching, because finally one of those surrounding Lex was unable to hold on any longer, and died from the shockwaves produced by the thunder. An immortal had died, just from being near Lex while he underwent his tribulation. Everyone held their breaths as they waited for the 9th and final bolt, but it did not arrive. They looked up at the clouds, and saw that multiple arcs of lightning conjoined directly above Lex, pooling in their energy to form an ominous shape, made entirely of electricity. Most did not recognize it. Even Jeffrey did not recognize it. The figure in the darkness, watching Lex from afar, did not recognize it. There was only one living soul in the entire trial zone that recognized the creature that was forming above Lex, and the sight of it stirred countless memories, forcing the soul's slumbering consciousness to begin to wake. Jeffrey didn't know what the creature being formed from lightning was, but he knew enough about tribulations to know what was happening. He finally acted, causing his body to melt, as if it was made from wax, and another arachnid body appeared just outside Lex's range of influence. "Fool," he cursed. "You think you're so smart, but you've only made my job easier." Steam began to rise from his body, and he once again began to change the form of his body. He had come here in his arachnid form because he was hiding from the Henali. Now that he was here, and his identity was revealed, he needed to hide no longer. Chapter 1230 Unleashed. Lex looked in the distance towards Jeffrey, completely unsurprised by his escape. The man was the closest thing Lex could consider to pure evil. He spent his time on Earth, causing countless conflicts, wars, and genocides just for his own entertainment. Moreover, it was not just mass conflict that entertained him. Sometimes, he chose his targets specifically and watched them suffer across their entire lives since it brought him a special kind of pleasure. As disgusting as it was, it required a meticulous and methodical mind. Lex would not believe it if he didn't have various contingencies planned out. Lex watched curiously as the mass and shape of his body seemed to increase, becoming completely different from what it was. For a brief moment, it almost seemed draconic to him, but Lex dismissed that idea. With his mastery over domination, no dragon close to him in realm could hide their aura from him. But it appeared that Lex learned something new today, as Jeffrey's form changed not to that of a dragon, but to that of a small wyvern. As he gained this form, his aura grew, as if he were no longer in the initial stages of the Earth immortal realm, but the latter ones. Wyverns were, in a sense, closely related to dragons, but not quite. They were an offshoot race from dragons, and were barbaric and animalistic in nature. They also lacked the many innate, powerful qualities of dragons. Lex, did you know, other than your sister's various samples, we also copied all her memories? Jeffrey spoke, his voice sharp yet harsh to hear. How do you know the one that you have is the real moon? What if she's just another clone we have, brainwashed to think she's the real moon? Whatever the creature was, it felt dangerous enough already, but once Jeffrey broke the multicolored crystal, whatever it was, the creature grew only more dangerous. He had finally entered the territory of things where he could not passively take things, and had to act. But that was fine too. For too long, his sword had been sheathed, hungry to reveal its sheen to the universe. A foe from the forgotten ages of the universe, one whose mere image carried a weight and pressure equal to that of dragon's might, was a worthy first foe. Although there would be no blood upon defeating it, the concept of first blood was symbolic to begin with. Lex looked up and met the gaze of the creature, who narrowed its eyes at Lex, almost as if it was sentient. It roared defiantly, as if meeting its gaze was sacrilege, and unleashed devastation as it spread its wings and dove from the sky, its nebulous figure falling directly towards Lex. You are the past, Lex whispered as his emotions welled up for some reason. Something deep inside of him told him that the history of this creature was far from simple. But that did not mean Lex would buckle to it. Domination began to spread from his body naturally as Lex's heart raced, filled with fighting intent. His sword intent, which he had honed for countless years, revealed itself like the bright rays of the rising sun, illuminating the entire realm with its light. The only thing not overwhelmed by the light of the sword was the dark outline of Lex's figure. But I am the future. He raised his right hand up in a ferocious swing, the weight of which caused a quake in the landmass across the entire zone. Finally, on the ninth lightning strike, his raised hand met the bolt of lightning, which was in the shape of a mysterious creature, and unleashed all the power he had sealed for so long, for the very first time.